Welcome to the definitive IRONEYE strategy guide. You're watching Dom's Roundtable, my name is Dom, and with countless hours in Nightreign already, I have beaten every Night Lord multiple times, along with many fully solo completion expeditions too. So I wanted to share my knowledge with you and help you become the best player you can possibly be, so that you can carry your team to victory every single time when using the IRONEYE. Today we'll be covering everything from hidden features and mechanics of all of IRONEYE's abilities, along with his weaknesses and mistakes to avoid, and general gameplay tips. So make sure you're subscribed for more of the best Nightreign content, and let's jump straight into his passive ability. The description of Eagle Eye is a keenly observant eye discovers more items to obtain from foes. The effect of this ability also applies to allies. This is definitely the most underwhelming of IRONEYE's abilities, but just you wait, he's still one of the most overpowered characters in the game. So firstly, with Eagle Eye, please note that this will not affect the quality of loot dropped. Therefore, when looting from fixed sources like boss rewards and chests, this will have no effect. However, all enemies have a chance to drop loot just as they did in Elden Ring, and whilst this doesn't happen particularly often, Eagle Eye will increase the chances of this happening quite substantially, especially because of the fact this doesn't just affect you, it affects your whole group, and this applies globally. So everyone is always benefiting from this increased loot drop chance from Eagle Eye no matter where on the map they are. And though this won't be hugely impactful for your weapons, it will be fantastic for consumables and other items that will help give you the edge in tougher fights. Now for his most overpowered ability and the reason that many people should be running the IRONEYE, and that is marking. You cut the foe with your dagger, creating a temporary weak point. Inflicting damage on the temporary weak point will destroy it and stagger foes. Damaging the weak point also extends its duration. Marking is the most complex of IRONEYE's abilities, and arguably even more powerful than his ultimate, making him an absolute beast of a class considering how frequently you can spam this ability. Even though you do have to get in close and cut your enemy with your dagger to apply marking, you will dash through them at incredible speed. So as long as you time it right, you're usually not in any danger. And in fact, you can even use this defensively to dash to the other side of an enemy as they are charging up an attack. Now, as for how this actually works, marking will create a weak point on your enemy, seen in the form of a red X. And if you hit multiple enemies at once with this dashing dagger, then you will apply weak points on all of them. Also, please do note that even if enemies have multiple targetable limbs, the weak point will always apply in the same place, but that doesn't mean you have to hit this place. It's purely cosmetic, just to let you know that the weak point is active. No matter where you or the rest of your team hit your enemy, it will still count as hitting the weak point, and yes, all of your hits count, not just your own. Now, whilst marking is active, two very important things happen. Firstly, this debuff will lower your enemy's resistance to all damage sources, making them take around 10% additional damage from everything. But even more importantly is what happens if you deal enough damage whilst the mark is active. As you and your team are hitting an enemy with a weak point on them, it is steadily increasing the duration of the weak point, giving you longer and longer to break it. And if you do manage to break it, they'll take a big chunk of damage akin to something like blood loss or frostbite, and they will also stagger. Now, this isn't a normal stagger, this is a special stagger only achievable by the IRONEYE. So on normal enemies, basically non-boss mobs, and some weaker bosses as well, it will act just like a normal stagger, knocking them down and leaving them open for a critical strike. However, on formidable bosses like the Night Lords, it will knock them out of their current animation, and it will even knock them back and stagger them just slightly, but it won't completely nullify them and it won't leave them open for a critical strike. However, this knockback still makes marking one of the most powerful character skills in the game, because you can spam this every 15 seconds or so, meaning that that mark is never going to run out. So as long as your team are keeping on the pressure and you are constantly destroying weak points, not only will you be briefly staggering your enemies, knocking them out of their animations, but you're going to keep dealing huge chunks of their life pool as well. So it is very important to remember to use your mark every time you have it available, and always keep it active, and that your team are coordinating their focus to break the marks as often as possible as well. And before we get onto the IRONEYE's ultimate art, I've spoke a lot in this video about coordination and working with a team, and though it is technically possible in a pickup group, it's obviously much better if you have a coordinated team, if you're ideally on voice comms, and if you don't have a couple of friends that you can do that with, or if you would just like to play with more of the community. Don't forget, we have an official Discord server. The link for that is down below in the description, and I'll try and remember to put it in the pinned comment as well. And in here, we have Nightfarers ready to go, ready to squad up. I have dedicated channels for each of the different platforms, though I'm praying for crossplay in the future. And even if you don't want to play with people, even if you just want to join the Discord to talk about Nightreign, that is absolutely fine. So make sure you join the Discord server, I would love to have you. And now let's talk about Single Shot, the IRONEYE's ultimate art. Single Shot sees you fire a powerful arrow that surpasses sound and ignores any defense. The arrow pierces all types of enemies, terrain, and structures, and you hold to draw the bow and aim before firing. Now, what does all of that actually mean in practice? So, where marking is absolutely fantastic for big, beefy single targets, Single Shot is surprisingly much better suited for fights with a large number of enemies. As you loose the arrow itself on your target, it will knock down most small and medium enemies, and very briefly stun larger enemies, doing a respectable amount of damage. But the real power comes from the supersonic shockwave after the arrow connects. This will deal damage over a large area around where the arrow traveled and where the arrow hit, and it will deal the same amount of damage as the arrow itself to all enemies that it connects with, along with knocking over most enemies as well. So though Single Shot doesn't do as much damage as most other ultimate arts, due to the fact that it can hit so many targets, makes it incredible at clearing groups of small and medium enemies. Single Shot also works in an incredibly unique way compared to every other arrow in the game, in that it will fly straight through all enemies and all terrain until it hits its mark. So make sure you are locked onto the furthest possible target, and it will deal damage to every single thing that it passed through once it reaches its destination. And yes, if possible, that includes flying through pillars, walls, and even ceilings and floors. The damage it deals is also true damage, meaning it ignores all forms of defense, making it universally effective against all targets, no matter their resistance. And as with all ultimate arts, you are invincible whilst charging it. Though charging it doesn't increase the damage that it deals, unlike some arts, what it will do is not only allow you to make use of the invincibility window, but it will also allow you to realign your aim if you need to change targets before you release your shot. Now that you know exactly how to make the most out of all of the IRONEYE's abilities, let's look at a few general gameplay tips along with things to avoid based on his weaknesses. Don't forget, every Nightfarer has weaknesses. They can't be absolutely unstoppable killing machines, or everyone would just run that one Nightfarer all the time. But as long as you're aware of your class's weaknesses, there are always ways around them to make them an unstoppable killing machine regardless. So firstly, even if you find a really good melee weapon for the IRONEYE, 99% of the time it's probably best to just stick with a bow. It's what he's designed for, and he's far more effective at range because his stats align perfectly to make the most out of ranged weapons. Obviously he's good with other dex scaling weapons like some curved swords, but he's most effective with a bow. Firstly, for IRONEYE gameplay tips, you must know the difference between firing at an enemy when locked on versus free aiming. And knowing when to use each of these depending on the situation can be incredibly powerful. So firstly, when you are locked on to an enemy and you fire with R1 or RB, you will shoot 4 arrows before a slight pause in the animation, effectively like a break as you grab the next 4 arrows and reload. Whereas if you are free aiming and scoped in with L1 before you then start firing with R1, you will just keep firing arrows until you are out of stamina. So you're going to get more DPS this way. However, obviously with more erratic enemies and bosses, you might be missing a few shots, and also your vision's a bit restricted. So more DPS, but less kind of utility and survivability. So know when to use both of these. But there is one more very important reason why you would want to free aim instead of locking on. So there are quite a few skills you can gather throughout the game that will trigger when your character is walking. And these skills are useless for the majority of characters because you don't want to be walking up to a Night Lord. However, with the IRONEYE, if you are locked on and firing, even though you are moving slow, you aren't classed as walking. However, if you're free aiming with L1, you are walking, so you will be permanently triggering these extra effects. And in this fight, you've hopefully been able to notice it, but I will show you it separately when the boss dies as well, is the fact that when I'm zoomed in and I'm shooting my arrows, all of these flame spouts keep shooting up out of the ground as well. That's because I have an activation on walk effect on my character. And these effects, as I say, are very powerful on the IRONEYE for this reason. Also, as he is the only ranged focused character who doesn't rely primarily on FP for his damage output, it makes him an absolute godsend for reviving your other teammates. And because of this purpose, it's great if you can find any items that lower his aggro and make enemies less likely to attack him. Because ideally, if only one member of your team can stay alive, you make it the IRONEYE, so that he can very easily bring your other teammates back from the brink. Also, remember to keep applying them weak points and breaking them for the additional damage chunks and the unique staggers. And be careful of your positioning at all times, because he is quite squishy. As I say, he can't be good at absolutely everything, and his health pool is below average. Also, in the early game, his damage doesn't quite stack up to most other people, but what you can do is equip him with relics that will grant his starting bow things like Frost or Bleed to make up for his slightly below average damage potential, and then even at the start of matches, this will make him an absolute god right out of the gate. And remember, you can use your marking slice to dash through enemies and avoid their attacks. Use it defensively as well as offensively. And again, don't worry about saving your single shot for bosses. It's even more effective at helping you quickly clear out camps so that you can level up faster and you are more strong for the final boss. And probably the final thing I'll say is that stamina management is also absolutely key for the IRONEYE. He burns through stamina with his constant unlimited arrow span, because yes, he doesn't need arrows. And if you are caught out of position with no stamina, it's pretty easy to get downed. So take his weaknesses into mind as well as his strengths, and you'll quickly become the backbone of any team. With that, my friends, now you know how to be an absolute god with the IRONEYE. As I say, I've got 7 more character guides coming out as well. Depending on when you watch this video, they might already be out, so go check them out as well if you want to know how to master every class in the game. And as always, all that's left for me to say is thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.